In this math video, we will learn how to add proper fractions that have different or unlike denominators. This is an important concept when you are studying basic math, including math needed for passing the GED test. If you have any questions regarding this math video, send an email to instructors@learningtrends.com. And for additional worksheets, visit learningtrends.com and worksheetsdirect.com. It's important to remember that when you add fractions, you need to look at the denominators first. That is, take a look at the numbers on the bottom part of the fraction and ask yourself, are they the same or are they different? Because remember that when you add fractions, the fractions need to have a common denominator. In other words, the numbers on the bottom part of the fractions must be the same. They have to be the same number. They must be like or similar fractions. Now, before we get into the addition, let's go ahead and review the difference between like and unlike fractions. You'll see that we have two boxes on the screen here, and let's take a look at the like fractions. You'll notice I'm highlighting it a little bit, and there are three fractions in that box. You've got 2/5, 3/5, and 1/5, and notice that they are all like or similar fractions because they have a denominator of 5. If you look at the box on the right hand side, you'll see all of our unlike fractions, and here we have three fractions again. We have 6/9, 2/7, and 4/10, and notice that in these three examples, all of the denominators, or the numbers on the bottom part of the fractions, are different. So those are examples of unlike fractions. Okay, let's go ahead and continue here. If the denominators are the same, in other words, the numbers on the bottom part of the fractions are the same number, then the fractions are ready to be added. However, if the denominators are not the same, you're going to need to find a common denominator. And we'll take a look at that in the next couple of slides. And one way of doing this, as far as finding a common denominator, is that you're going to want to find a common multiple. That is a number that is a multiple of both denominators. Let's take a closer look at common multiples. And a common multiple is a number that is a multiple of two or more numbers. And we are going to look at the examples of 3 and 6 and find multiples of 3 and 6. So let's start with 3, and the first 6 multiples of 3 are 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and 18. And let's find the first 3 multiples of 6, which are 6, 12, and 18. Now notice that the common multiples of 3 and 6 are in red. In other words, 6, 12, and 18 are common multiples for both the number 3 and the number 6. The least common multiple, that is the smallest common multiple, is 6, and therefore the LCM, or the least common multiple, is 6. It is the smallest multiple that is the same for both numbers. Any common multiple will work when you are subtracting fractions, but finding the lowest common multiple is the best. Let's find the lowest common multiple, or LCM, of 5 and 6. The first 6 multiples of 5 are 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. The first 5 multiples of 6 are 6, 12, 18, 24, and 30. So you'll notice that there is only one common multiple for both 5 and 6, and we needed to go out about 5 or 6 multiples to find that. So the lowest common multiple of 5 and 6 is 30. Now that we know how to find common multiples and lowest common multiples, we need to learn or review another skill before we add our fractions. We need to learn how to find equal or equivalent fractions. Equivalent fractions are fractions that may look different, but they are equal or have the same value. An example of equal fractions is 1/2 and 2/4. And let's take a look at this example. If you had a pizza and evenly divided it into 2 pieces and then ate 1 piece, it would be the same as if you had a pizza of the same size and equally divided it into 4 pieces and then ate 2 of the slices. You would have eaten the same amount. So you can see that 1/2 is equal to 2/4. One way to find equal fractions is to use the cross product rule. And let's view a video to learn about the cross product rule. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look a little bit more at the cross product rule. And you'll see that I've got 2 equal fractions. 2/4 equals 4/8, and there's a method of finding whether or not, in fact, they are equal fractions, and that is using the cross product rule. And that rule tells us that if we take the numerator of one fraction times the denominator of the other, in other words, 2 times 8, that should equal the product of the second numerator and the second denominator, which would be 4 times 4 in this example. And we can see that 2 times 8 equals 16, and 4 times 4 equals 16. So those 2 fractions are equal, and we confirm that using the cross product rule. Now let's have another set of fractions, and let's determine whether or not they are equal using the cross product rule. And let's say that we've got 3/6 on one side, and we've got 9/18 on the other. And let's go ahead and use our cross product rule. We're going to take 3 times 18, and 3 times 18 should equal 9 times 6. And 9 times 6 is 54, and 3 times 18, you can use your, go ahead and just multiply it or grab your calculator, but 3 times 18 is also 54. So we were able to determine that 3/6 is in fact equal to 9/18 by using this cross product rule. Let's explore the cross product rule just a little more and look at fractions where we are given the denominator of the second fraction and need to find the numerator. Let's explore the cross product rule a little more. And in our first example, we have 1/4 as our fraction, and in our second fraction we have a denominator of 12, and we can use a cross product rule in order to determine what the numerator should be in that second fraction. So we know that according to our cross product rule, we take the numerator of one fraction times the denominator of the second, so we have 1 times 12, and that will equal the numerator of the second fraction as well as times the denominator. So let's just go ahead and put x there since we don't know what that value is, and that will give us 4 times x, or 4x. So 1 times 12 equals 4 times some number, and 1 times 12 is 12, and so we've got 4 times some number, and if we divide both sides by 4, we can see that the value of that numerator is going to be 3. So we'll just put x equals 3. And we can confirm that by taking those 2 fractions again, and we've got 1/4
and that equals 3/12. And we can use our cross product rule and multiply and see whether or not they are equal. And we have 1 times 12 should equal 4 times 3, and in fact it does. 1 times 12 is 12, and 4 times 3 is 12. So those two fractions checked out. We're going to take a look at two more examples using the cross product rule, and let's just go ahead and start working them through. 3 times 4 will equal 6 times what some number, and let's call that some number x. So 6 times some number, or x. So that gives us 3 times 4 is 12, and 6 times x is 6x. And so 12 equals 6 times what number? We know that what number is 2, but if we divide both sides by 6, we'll see that x, or that some number, equals 2. So 6 equals 2 over 4. And again, we could use that cross product rule, double check, but 3 times 4 is 12, and 6 times 2 is 12, so 12 equals 12. Let's try a second example. And here we've got 2/5 equals some number over 15. And let's go ahead and take the 2 times 15, and 2 times 15, that will equal 5 times some number, and that some number will be represented by x, so 5 times x. 2 times 15 is 30, and so 30 equals 5 times some number, or 5x. Well, we know that 5 times 6 equals 30, so x is going to be 6, but we can follow up and just divide each side by 5, and 30 divided by 5 is 6, and so x equals 6. Again, we can double check it, and we can see that our 2 times 15 is 30, and 6 times 5 is 30. 30 equals 30, and so those two fractions are in fact equal.
Let's look at finding another way to find an equal fraction by finding an equal fraction of 2/5. And you're going to ask yourself, what can I multiply to 5 in order to get 10? And you'll see that 5 times 2 equals 10. And as you may know, you want to multiply the denominator and the numerator by the same number. And in this case, we're going to multiply the numerator 2 and the denominator 5 by 2 in order to create our equal fraction. So just as 5 times 2 equals 10, 2 times 2 equals 4. And therefore, we've created our equal fraction, and we see that 2/5 is the same as 4/10. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at a video and work through a couple more problems, and as we do this, you're welcome to pause the video, work through the problem, finding those equal fractions, and then resume the video so that you can check your answers. Or if you prefer, you can go ahead and simply watch the video all the way through.
Let's take a look at 3 examples of finding equal fractions by asking ourselves what the relationship is between the two denominators. And we have 3 examples that we're going to work through. So in our first example, we have 1/2 equals something over 4. And we want to ask ourselves, 2 times what number is going to equal 4? Well, we know that 2 times 2 equals 4. So in our first example, if we multiplied our denominator by 2, we learned that we have to multiply our numerator by 2 as well. And so we have 1 times 2, which is 2. So we learned that 1/2 is equal to 2/4. And by using the cross product rule, we could in fact just double check it. And we've got 1 times 4, which is 4, and 2 times 2, which is 4. So 4 equals 4, and in fact they are equal. So that's another way of just double checking it if you wanted to do that. In our second example, we have 15 and 45 in our denominator positions, and we ask ourselves 15 times what number equals 45, and if we do multiples of 15, we've got 15, 30, 45, so that would be 3. 15 times 3 is 45. And because we multiplied the denominator by 3 in example 2, we have to multiply the numerator by 3 as well, and 6 times 3 is 18. So 6 over 15 is equal to 18 over 45. And we have one last example. 1/3 equals some number over 15. And again, we're going to ask ourselves 3 times what number equals 15, and we know that 3 times 5 is 15. Again, if we multiplied our denominator by 5, we have to multiply our numerator by 5 as well, and 1 times 5 is 5. So we'll sum it up and we'll check our last problem, number 3. 1/3 should equal 5/15. We'll use our cross product rule just to double check. 1 times 15 is 15, and 3 times 5 is 15. It checks out. 15 equals 15. So just another way of finding equal fractions is to ask yourself, how do I get from one denominator to the other through multiplication? Hope this helps.
Okay, we are now ready to look at the steps of adding proper fractions that do not start out with common denominators. And there's going to be 4 steps that we're going to briefly review in this slide. The first step is to look at the denominators, and if they are not the same, you want to find a common denominator. Next, you want to find equal fractions. After you find equal fractions, you want to add, and once you're done adding, you want to reduce. We're going to take a look at an example where we're going to add 2 fractions, and the fractions we're going to add are 2/6 and 3/4. We're going to view a video, and we're going to see about solving this example of adding 2/6 and 3/4, and then we're going to view a couple of other examples. And if you like, again, you can pause the video and work through them on your own, or simply view the video in its entirety.
Okay, let's add the 2 fractions. We've got 2/6 plus 3/4, and by following the steps that are outlined. And the first one says that we should look at the denominators and see whether or not they are equal, and they are not. We have a denominator of 6 and a denominator of 4, and so we need to find a common denominator. And we learned that one way of finding a common denominator is to use multiples. So we'll do multiples of 6 and multiples of 4 and find that first common multiple. So I'm going to start out, and I'm going to write down the first 3 multiples of each of these numbers. So for 6, we've got 6, 12, and 18. And 4, we've got 4, 8, and 12. And so immediately we see that we do have a number that is common to both the 6 and the 4, and that is 12. So we can use 12 as our common denominator. The next step is that we need to find equal fractions, and we learned that there are 2 ways of doing it. We can either use cross product rule, or we can multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number, which is the method that we're going to use here in this example. So we look at our 6, and we say 6 times what number equals 12, and we know that 6 times 2 equals 12. So we need to multiply the numerator by 2 as well, and 2 times 2 is 4. So 2 6 is the same as 4 12ths. Let's look at our second fraction, and we've got 3/4, and we're going to change that to a denominator of 12. Again, we're going to ask ourselves 4 times what number equals 12, and 4 times 3 equals 12. And let's multiply the numerator by 3 as well, and 3 times 3 is 9. So now we have two fractions that have the same common denominator. We have 4 12ths plus 9 12ths. And so this becomes the fraction then that we are going to add, because they now have common denominators. And we learn that if the denominator is the same, which they are, because we made them the same, then we simply add the numerators. And our numerator, the two numerators are 4 and 9, so 4 plus 9. And that gives us 13 over 12. Now 13 over 12 is an improper fraction. We can leave it that way, or we can change it to a mixed number. And we do that by dividing the numerator by the denominator, and 12 goes into 13 once. We subtract the 12. We're not going to write it as a remainder, but rather as take that 1 and put it over our denominator of 12. And so our answer can either be 13 over 12, or as a mixed number, it's 1 1/12. Let's take a look at a second example. And in our second example, let's look at adding 2/3 plus 1/5. And again, we're going to follow the different steps, and the first step is to look at the denominators and see whether or not they are the same. And again, they are not. We have a 3 and a 5. So we're going to use our method of finding the lowest common multiple. And so we're going to find multiples of 3 and multiples of 5. And so let's start with 3, and this time we'll do the first, probably 5. So we've got 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15. And we'll start with 5. I think we'll just have to go out 3 because we've got 5, 10, 15. And you'll see that 15 is our first common multiple. So we will use that as our common denominator. And we'll use 15. And then our next step will be to find equal fractions for each one of those fractions. So we need to find an equal fraction for 2/3. And we know that 3 times 5 is 15. So we'll multiply the numerator by 5, and 2 times 5 is 10. So 2/3 equals 10 over 15. In our second fraction, 1/5, we know that 5 times 3 equals 15. So we'll take 1 times 3, and that gives us 3. So we've changed our original fractions that had different denominators, the 3 and the 5, to our fractions with common denominators, and our common denominator now is 15. So if you have a common denominator, which we do, it's 15, we simply add our numerators, and we have 10 plus 3. Our numerators, and 10 plus 3 is 13. So our answer is 13 over 15. And we want to just check it to see whether or not it can be reduced, or should we rename it to a mixed number. And in this particular example, we do not have to, because 13/15 is reduced as far as it can go. Okay, we have your answer to lowest terms. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at an example, and we'll use the two fractions from above. So we've got 1/2 and we have 1/3, and we're going to take 1/2 plus 1/3, and we notice that the denominators, the 2 and the 3, are not the same. So the first step, step 1, is that we need to make like fractions, and you'll notice that I put an equal sign there because we're making equal fractions, but we want to find a denominator that will work with both of those fractions. One way of finding a common denominator is to do multiples of the denominator until we find a common denominator. Usually I will do about 4 or 5 multiples. So if we do 2, it would be 2, 4, 6, and 8. If we do multiples for 3, we've got 3, 6, and 9. And you'll notice that 6 is a common multiple for both 2 and 3. So I'm going to use 6 as my common denominator. There are other denominators or other multiples rather that you could use, but we're looking for the first common, the lowest common multiple, if you will, and that's what we're going to use. So you recall that to find those fractions or equal fractions, you can do cross products, or you can simply ask yourself 2 times what number equals 6, and 2 times 3 equals 6. Therefore, I'm going to multiply the numerator by 3 as well, and so 1/2 equals 3/6. We'll do the same thing with 1/3, and 3 times 2 gives us 6. Therefore, we're going to multiply 2 on top, and 1/3 equals 2/6. We now have two fractions, 3/6 and 2/6, and we'll notice that this time our denominators are the same. They're like fractions, so we simply add the numerators, and we've got 3 plus 2 over 6, which gives us 5/6. So our answer is 5/6. We want to take a look and see if we can reduce this fraction, which we cannot, so our final answer is 5/6. Let's take a look at another example, and let's look at 3/4 plus 3/8. And we're adding proper fractions, and we'll see that the denominators are not the same. They are unlike fractions. One is a 4 and one is a 8. So the first step is that we need to find an equal fraction with a common denominator, and we're going to find multiples of 4 and 8, and more than likely you've already seen that we can use 8 as our common denominator, because it is a common multiple of 4 and 8. And 4 times 2 equals 8, and 3 times 2 equals 6. 8 times 1 equals 8, and 3 times 1 equals 3. So 3/4 is equivalent to 6/8, and 3/8 stays the same as 3/8. We now have a common denominator, so we've got 8 in both of the fractions, and we simply add the numerator, 6 and 3, which gives us 9. So we have 9/8. Now you'll notice that in this example, 9/8 is an improper fraction, meaning that the number on top, the 9, is larger than the 8. So we're going to want to rename this as a mixed number, and you'll recall that to do that, we're going to divide our 9 by 8. 8 goes into 9 one time, and we're going to subtract 8. We get 1 as a remainder, and we're going to put that 1 in the numerator position, and then our denominator was an 8. So 9/8 is the same as 1 1/8.
Okay, we're going to practice now what we've learned about adding proper fractions with unlike denominators by looking at a word problem. And we're going to go ahead and read through this word problem, and then we're going to solve it. And it says that Mrs. Smith baked 3 pizzas for her daughter's 10th birthday. When she cleaned up after the party, she noticed that 1/2 of the sausage pizza was left over, 2/3 of the pepperoni, and 1/6 of the cheese pizza. How much pizza was left over? Now there's a lot of information in this particular problem, and I would recommend that you read it again. In this problem, we need to find out what the problem is asking us to solve, and we can see that by locating the question, and that's how much pizza was left over. So we know that 1/2 of the sausage was left over, 2/3 of the pepperoni was left over, and 1/6 of the cheese pizza was left over. So to find out how much is left over altogether, we would add all 3 of those fractions. So we're going to go ahead and view a video on adding these fractions.
Okay, in our word problem, we're talking about pizza here, and we want to add our 3 fractions to see how much is left over. And we have 1/2, and we want to add 2/3, and we want to add 1/6. So we have 3 fractions in this word problem that we want to add together. We follow the same method as if there were only 2 fractions. We need to have a common denominator. And in our example here, we see that we do not. We have a 2, 3, and a 6. So we are going to have to find equal fractions for all 3 of those with a common denominator. We'll use our multiple method. So we're going to find multiples of 2, 3, and 6. And perhaps you can already see that 6 is going to be our lowest common multiple, but let's go ahead and find the first several of each one of those so that we can take a look just to be sure. So we'll start with 2, and we've got 2, 4, 6. We'll stop there because we see that we've got our 6 here. And then 3, we've got 3, 6. So our lowest common multiple for all 3 of these fractions that we can use is 6. And then we're going to use the method of multiplying. So 2 times 3 equals 6, and then we'll multiply the 3 times the numerator in this fraction. So 1 times 3 is 3. 1/2 equals 3/6. In our second fraction, 2/3, we know that 3 times 2 equals 6. So we'll multiply the numerator 2 times 2, and that gives us 4. 2/3 equals 4/6. And in our last fraction, 1/6, well, 1/6 equals 1/6. We take that by multiplying numerator and denominator by 1. So now we have changed our fractions where they didn't have a common denominator to fractions where there is a common denominator. That common denominator is 6. We do the same thing. We add now our numerators. So we have 3 plus 4 plus 1. And 3 plus 4 is 7. 7 plus 1 is 8. So we have 8 over 6. We have 8/6 of the pizza left over after the party. Now, this is an improper fraction, so we're going to want to change it back. And if we were to piece up all those slices of delicious pizza, we would actually have more than a whole pizza left over. We can simplify first and then change it to a mixed number, which is what I'm going to do. So when we simplify, we're going to divide both numerator and denominator by the same number, and in this case we're going to divide the 8 by 2 and the 6 by 2, and that gives us 4/3. as a reduced fraction. So 8/6 was reduced to 4/3. Let's now change that to a mixed number by dividing, and let's take 4 divided by 3. 3 goes into 4 once. We subtract. We're going to take that remaining 1, make that into a fraction. And so what we have is that after the party, we actually have 1 1/3 pizza left over.
Thank you for viewing our video on adding proper fractions with different or unlike denominators. For other GED and homeschool math help, visit worksheetsdirect.com and learningtrends.com.